I'm connecting to cloud server. I'm assuming that that's what I'm supposed to do. Very well. Very well. Thank you, thank you, thank you. 1, 2, 3. And here we are. 2, 3, getting the timer together. All right. Thank you so much for joining us here, and welcome to the 10th anniversary of the Creative Conference, part of the 44th Annual Atlanta Film Festival. The name of this panel is Diversity Matters, More Than Just a Number. I'm the moderator, Eugenia Harvey. I am also the Chief Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Officer of the WNET group, where I'm also an executive producer there. I have to tell you, happily, that the WNET group is America's flagship PBS station based in New York City. Many of the national signature PBS series that you may know and love, including Nature, Great Performances, American Masters, PBS NewsHour Weekend, and the PBS Kids series Cyber Chase, are all housed under the WNET group. We also present the multi-platform initiatives, including Chasing the Dream, about poverty and opportunity and justice in America, and Peril and Promise, the challenge of climate change. I mention those in large part because I'm the executive producer of those initiatives, and it's one of the reasons that I get to be here is because of that amazing work. But enough about me. Let's hear from these panelists who I'm so excited to be here with, and think they're gonna add a whole different layer and flavor to what we're doing here. I'm gonna start with my friend Andrea Harry Bibbs. Andrea.
Hi, thanks for having me. I'm excited to be at this panel. My name, as you said, is Andrea Bibbs. I am the Senior Director of Diversity and Inclusion for WarnerMedia News and Sports. So I'm based here in Atlanta, and WarnerMedia News and Sports encompasses CNN wide, Turner Sports, Bleacher, and WarnerMedia Studios. I've been with the company, this is my 20th year anniversary. I've been a year, and so prior to this role, I was behind the scenes. So on the editorial side, started at CNN Sports, at CNN.com for a few years, and HLN. So had a lot of experience behind the scenes, and excited now to be in this role affecting change, you know? So I'm excited about this conversation.
Changes in the air.
Yes.
Mark Kang, tell us a little bit about you, who you are, where you work, what you do.
Sure. Well, thank you for having me. My name is Mark Kang, and I'm currently serving as a Senior Vice President for INSP, which is a leading family-friendly linear channel. We have about 75 million subscribers, and we are producing and also more on the Western content. And we've, we also have an internal production company that houses our original content called the MagicCom Entertainment. So mainly my role is to do distribution and distribute the content and channels throughout all the other platforms. And it's a very fast changing climate, as you know. And previous to that, I've been in that cable network business for a while, starting out with Core TV, which became True TV under Turner, and also Sportsman Channel, which was a hunting and fishing channel. And I had a short stint in between as a talent agent, mostly for hip hop music artists, including Wu-Tang, Lil' Kim, and Naughty by Nature, all the golden ages of hip hop in the 90s, which are my personal favorites. And started out in the investment banking with Morgan Stanley in my career right out of college. So, currently I also serve as a, vice chair for NAMIC National Board of Directors, which we're very excited about just during this climate, and hoping to make some changes in terms of perspective and just community around us. So Thank you.
That's awesome. Before I go to Angela, tell us what NAMIC stands for, please.
National Association of Multicultural in Communications.
National Association of Multiculturals in Communication. Very good. All right, so keeping the clockwise theme going here, Angela Willoughby, tell us who you are.
I'm Angela, and I'm a supervising producer for the Tamron Hall show. I'm pretty new. I've only been here for 7 months. Prior to that, I was at The View for 5 years, and I left The View in March with my executive producer, Candy Carter, who was moving over to Tamron Hall. And so it was no question. I knew I was leaving with her. And so we left literally during the pandemic. We left The View in the middle of March. I think it was around March 20th. So it was literally in the height of a pandemic. We left The View, and we didn't know really what was going to happen with Tamron because they were off the air. But Candy Carter is just an amazing executive producer. She switched into gears and got us taping shows from home. And so we were fortunate to literally put on new shows from Tamron's home, which was an amazing experience. And so now we're back in the studio for season 2, very small skeleton staff. So I'm happy to be here. And prior, again, to Tamron Hall, I was at The View for 5 years. I was at CNN for 7 years. I have a lot of experience in local news, network news, and other talk shows. And I'm happy to be here.
Wow, so many of our roads came through Turner. That's so interesting. All right, break us up here, Mr. Hastings.
All right. So I'm Chris Hastings. I'm executive producer for World Channel, which is a national public media news and documentary channel that is operated out of WGBH in Boston. It's the other PBS flagship station where we produce the shows Frontline, Masterpiece, American Experience, Nova, Antiques Roadshow, and there's a couple other ones that I'm forgetting. But World Channel is meant to be, quite frankly, a diversity platform for content that is about diverse communities and for, quite frankly, different points of view. I've been at WGBH for 18 years in December. I started out at BET many years ago. No, I did not go work in CNN or for Turner ever, but I've known a few people, so it's a pleasure to meet you all.
Oh, fantastic. Well, I will say, what I'm hearing here, and what comes immediately to the top of my mind, whenever I have conversations around diversity with non-BIPOC persons, non-Black, Indigenous, people of color, is we just can't find any Black people at your level or any people of color at your level. And I'm happy to send them this clip to say perhaps not us. We are all gainfully employed, but we could, with 2 clicks of our address books, we could probably find you some people. So it's very good to connect, and it's very good to let the audience of the Atlanta Film Festival be aware that these are issues that we are concerned about. But let's talk a little bit about us. Let's talk about us personally a little bit. I want to talk about our collective careers here. We're all 20+ year veterans in this industry, and we've had some experience. So I want to ask each of you, starting with you, Andrea, when did you realize in your professional life that you were somehow othered, meaning you were considered different by your white colleagues? Whether you can define whatever that is, whatever that meant to you.
Yeah, it's interesting when you told me this question, because I asked you, I said, when, like professional or like when I was 3 and I walked into kindergarten, So I'm originally from Toronto. I grew up there. I was born in Montreal, but grew up just outside of Toronto, and grew up, in a really multicultural area. But a lot of times I was the only Black person or Black child. Actually, I got my first experience in media in high school. I had to do an internship while I was there, and the internship was at a media company. And I was the only person in that office, in that newsroom. And it was really interesting, but I still was like drawn to this industry. You know, I was actually a guidance counselor that said I wanted to do an intern accounting because I had the highest grades there, but I consumed media. But the thing, I consumed magazines and as much as I could see on air, but I never thought that was, like, I never thought that the news was a place for me. I never thought the magazine world, because I didn't see a lot of people that looked like me. But when I did this intern, I felt like even though I didn't see people that looked like me, drawn to, you know, getting these press kits and media kits first. So knowing about the movies that were coming out, knowing about like the new music. And so that just, you know, even though I didn't see anyone around me that looked like me, I still was like, I can do this. You know, for so many of us, times we're maybe the only ones that look like us in an environment, but we still push through, right? We'll have to push through and feel like we belong. But if you'll allow me, I actually did a little bit of cleaning up and I found something that I did. So I put together, I don't know if you can see, a flyer I put together after that internship, and it said journalism requires more than a pretty face, and it was me. And basically I put this pamphlet together for a career fair we did after our internship. And this was the only clip art I found when I was looking journalist. So it looks like Ronald Reagan. It's like, you know, I was like, and so I found this a few weeks ago. As I was cleaning up, and you know, I'm saying, you know, my fellow students, like, you can have a career in journalism. It's actually really cool. And look, everyone looks like you know. So it's just crazy. I mean, this was like 1993, but sometimes you Google now, you know, journalists, and you may not always see people that look like us. And so that's why I think it's just so important for especially journalists of color that we tell our stories and that we share with the next generation that, yes, you have a place in the industry, right? I mean, what we're trying to do, especially at WarnerMedia, is we're trying to make sure that our content is reflective of our audiences and reflective of this, you know, reflective of the world. We can't keep doing content, and I think as an industry, we can't keep producing content that doesn't reflect what our country looks like, because again, if the younger generation is not seeing people in these roles, so not just in front of the camera, but especially behind, because when I go to conferences like NAMIC or NABJ, the lineup for on-air folks is like down the hall, but you know, talk to me about like being an EP. We need EPs, and you can actually, in my point of view, you can have such a bigger mark, you know, on this industry behind the scenes. So that was a long way around saying, I mean, that was my first experience in the media industry. And then I actually interned here at CNN 20 years ago in college, and that was a little bit different of an experience. It was one of the first times I saw people that look like me in management positions. And that really changed my outlook. You know, it made me feel like, okay, yeah, maybe I do have a future in this industry.
Wow. So Mark, you're not in journalism. You have taken the entertainment route, which is looks, at least on paper, to be fairly, frankly, BIPOC centric. I mean, I may just be basing this on my playlist, okay? But you know, you're in this space, right? That's challenged with entertaining us. Have you felt othered? Did you feel like, you know, you were somehow singled out as being different? And feel free to draw on your experiences, you know, growing up.
Yeah, sure. I would say that for most part, I get reminded, I think, pretty frequently, but not necessarily in a, I would say, a discriminating way, but it's more of a question that a lot of people come and ask and say, hey, are you Japanese or are you Korean? Like, they want to get it right, like somehow. They think, you know, you see an Asian person and they feel that, you know, because they have other Asian friends and they identify that, and they kind of I think, feel that if they guess somehow your ethnicity, that we would be impressed and be like, yeah, I'm Korean, man. How'd you know? So I've experienced a lot of that kind of conversations or curiosity just approaching me. But I would say that certainly, I mean, Asians are sort of interesting, right? Especially American Asians, because like you have the Asians and then you have the Americans and you have like Asian Americans who are sort of like in between. Maybe they speak English, maybe they don't. Maybe they're quiet, maybe they're outgoing. So we're sort of this anomaly, a sort of a mutant, I would say. And you know, I share with people how in our culture, within Asian culture, when I was growing up, my parents would be like, "Hey, always stay on the safe side." You know, there's a proverb that says, you know, a nail that sticks out will be hammered, right? That's like the saying. Whereas in the US, in American culture, it's like squeaky wheel gets the grease. So it's almost directly the opposite of what you are believing. And I would say, as it relates to entertainment is still, I would say recently it's sort of shifted, but from our parents' generation, it's looked to be a low-class occupation. They're not actors or any type of, you know, entertainment. You're better off going into becoming a lawyer and a doctor, and hence the reason, you know, you see a lot of doctors and lawyers and sort of those type of professions among Asians. So we battle with this cultural sort of paradox or almost like a contradictory sort of culture, where we're living in this culture of American culture, yet our parents are saying to do these other things. So we have to almost defy what they want us to do in order to become part of this media, you know, career, being in a career of media. So, you know, it's sort of it's been an interesting journey. Of course, I was in investment banking, and coming into the entertainment field also was a stretch for me.
Sure, your dad loved that.
Yeah. And, you know, I would say in terms of feeling like that, I was sort of different than others ethically or culturally, is that, you know, there's, as Andrea pointed out, there weren't that many Asian Americans. I mean, if you see even in the screen, behind the screen, there aren't many at all. When I go to these conferences or if sitting in a conference room, and I would think the Asian Americans, I would say that they're more aware of that than other, I think, ethnicity, because we talk about it. We go, wow, how did you end up here? Like, we were always asking if we meet other Asian Americans or Asians, we just kind of are curious to see what their journey was in becoming and coming to where they are. So yeah, so it's I think we're a little more conscious about that, but I think definitely there is a need for more Asian Americans to break out of that stereotype and being in that culture of mindset of, hey, these are sort of the only careers that you could go after. Because, I mean, I think media is very lucrative and a safe route in a lot of ways too. So yeah, that's sort of my behind the scenes story.
That's awesome. Angela, I'm going to tweak the question for you a little bit. Angela, can you still hear us? I think you're frozen.
Yes.
Okay.
No, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you fine, but you're frozen like a beautiful goddess. You look like, I'm going to tweak this question for you a little bit. Angela Ramos.
Wait, am I still frozen?
No, you're back in, you're giving
okay.
kind of robotic motions, but you know. So you're Angela Ramos, or some would say Ramos Willoughby. That's who you were when I met you. You know, I knew you as that, but I want to tweak this for you because you are a person of color working for a person of color, Tamron Hall, and you have worked, you know, in both a you know, really white environment, and now you're in one that is at least helmed by a person of color. How different is that? Does it make a difference? Is it something that, you know, film festival goers and people listening to this seminar, do they need to know that there's a different thing? Like, is there something that you do differently, or any way that you feel when you walk in those doors, when doors open again?
I got to tell you, being in New York and having all my work in New York, I think it's a little different because New York is like this one big melting pot. So I've also been on the other side. Like I never really looked at race or paid attention to it in the workplace until it was brought to my attention. You know, maybe there was a conversation or something happened on the news, and I was like, and then it starts to make you think about maybe opportunities that you were passed up for, or promotions that you didn't get. But for me, I'm of the mindset that I just never looked at it that way. For me, it's like I go into a place, whether it's an environment where it's run. I mean, we've worked at a Rise where it was, 99.9% African American, minority. And I've worked at corporations, I mean, networks where it wasn't. But for me, the way I deal with it is I just go and I just try to do the best job that I can get. And so for me, I tend to not lead with race. Again, until there is an issue, and then it's like, oh, you know so I can't say that I noticed a difference then, but I will say I was actually on a call with someone that Eugenia and I used to work with at Arise, and we were just reminiscing about the fun that we had there. And I said, a lot of us took for granted when we were in that environment where it was 99.9% minority or African American, I would say, because it was a sense of culture and a sense of family, knowing that there really weren't any politics, being played. It wasn't political. It was fair. It was balanced. We might not have gotten paid, because of issues on that side, but that had nothing to do with how the network was being ran. And you don't appreciate it until you're not there. And I literally said, wow, I kind of miss that. I've never been in a position where I had to deal with that. But, there was a network that was just recently in the news because they were, accused of some things. And then you sit back and you go, oh, but I don't think until it's like really in you or it happens to you, you're kind of aware. I think for a lot of us, it's just stories that we hear until, again, it's personal. So I've been kind of fortunate, but I will say I do love working with two people of color, because my executive producer is African-American female, and then I have Tamron. And I left The View to go with Candy Carter. So that obviously speaks volumes. I mean, that show is a very secure show. And I know Tamron, there's a viable future for us ahead, but I left that show because I knew that I wanted to work with Candy again and also Tamron. And so I think it does play a difference.
Candy Carter, for people who don't know, the executive producer of the Tamron Hall show, was also an executive producer of Oprah, correct?
I don't think she was an executive producer of Oprah, but she was a producer on Oprah.
She's a producer. She was pretty high up though. I mean, I saw her, profiled on it, and she, she had some serious bona fides, and it was a huge, headline making event when she was tapped to helm The View, which is a legacy show for ABC News, which I think both Angela and I are also alums of ABC, Disney, Corp, and that's all we'll say about that. So no shade. I don't mean any shade. It's just I don't work there anymore, and I don't have any insight. So, but Chris Hastings, you are Mr. Documentary, and a lot of content creators, especially. I mean, you are God. I mean, this is like a dream job, for so many people who work in DEI issues. You literally greenlight documentaries that have to deal with diasporic issues, that have to deal with BIPOC issues. And, if I had to say, what would be a dream job for someone who cares so passionately, all eyes kind of would look at you, like you get to do this all day. So what's in the spirit of the question, how does that sit within the walls of, other PBS projects and products? How does that feel to be in that space at GBH, which does have a very robust history of content creation that is at least sensitive to BIPOC? But You know, have you experienced any sense of place or displacement in that universe? I think you're muted. You're muted.
Sorry, I was trying to make it all, work. Um, so, do I feel displacement in the universe where I'm in?
Yeah,
I
have you
think,
experienced that
yeah.
as a person whose job it is to create, to collate, to aggregate works about people of color? How does that fit within the greater confines of, you know, the GBH PBS universe?
I mean, I think, to be honest with you, it's an odd situation that I have. When I talk to people about what I do, it's such a unique role. I'm an executive producer and a curator for a channel that's not PBS, um, but we're part of PBS. And so I think what I enjoy is um, the time that's been given to me to, one, build up a platform that is dedicated to bringing in more diversity for public media, which is actually meant to be about diversity. And so I'm enjoying at least at the moment, in being able to really show a mirror to what we're supposed to be on World Channel. I think over the years there's been criticism of what PBS and public media does for underrepresented communities. And so my job is to really make sure that we're actualizing the mission, the 1968, 1967 mission of making sure that we're bringing in diverse points of view and representing what America should be. Um, so I think I'm enjoying that sort of prospect, because I think if within the PBS world, this is the one role as a curator that's intentionally been funded by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting to actually bring in more diversity. Now, I think it's all part of our job titles within PBS, but I think my role as the chief curator for World Channel, it's meant to sort of actualize that in a very different way. So I'm enjoying that. Like, sometimes I say I have the best job in public media because I don't have to be PBS. And not to say I don't follow the rules, but sometimes I invent some new rules that inspire a lot of good things that happen um, within the system. And so I get to work with PBS and I get to inspire them and I get to introduce them to makers who look like me. And so being that sort of door opener is something that's been a part of my career since I've been here. Um, but when we think about where I started at BET, um, I came from this little small school in Pennsylvania where it was a television department called in Kutztown University, Pennsylvania, which is in the middle, basically middle of the state. And so when I graduated, I ran to Washington, D.C. and I got an internship at Black Entertainment Television, and they embraced me, and that internship turned into my first job. And I got to meet Black executive producers and Black journalists who worked in the DC area, and they embraced me. And they thought I was a little odd because I wanted to make children's television shows, but they thought it was cool, and they said, go over there and do this. But they taught me journalism, and they taught me journalism about curating content for a Black community. And so the work that I was doing at BET, quite frankly, has carried me into my 40s because I'm just doing it at a different place. I'm doing it in Boston versus DC. The work that I was doing at BET, what I learned was the basics. And then I'm taking that basic to a new platform. So to answer your question and not to be, winded about it, I'm liking where I'm at, but I can tell you sometimes when you look up and you don't see enough EPs, it's probably why you and I have bonded, is that I've been able to sort of build allegiances with other people like me outside of GBH, and I think that's important. Otherwise, I don't know if I would be able to sustain if I weren't able to reach outside of the building and reach to other cities and to travel a lot, which I can't do right now. But it's a big part of what I do to sort of open the door, bring more of us in, but also to build bridges with other folks that look like me.
Well, you bring up a really good point that I think we should all talk about. Let's talk about the sustainability around what our work now entails. You know, right now, of course, 2020, we're in the fall of 2020, and we're in the height of you know, attention around Black Lives Matter. Black Lives Matter has always been an issue. You know, police brutality and all of that has always been, but now it seems like content creators, media companies, news outlets, filmmakers, everyone is trying to, you know, move us into the conversation, the greater conversation around it. Sustainability. How do we sustain the interest around diversity, equity, inclusion, accessibility? You know, we, especially those of us in news, we know that a topic can be really hot, right? For 6 weeks, 8 weeks, 6 months, you know, but you know, the election is coming, things might change. How are we going to sustain this intensity around, you know, diversity issues? You want to start with that, Chris?
I keep reminding people that this can't just be a moment where you just go over there and look at it and do it, because no matter what, whatever we're dealing with, it's because change is being felt. And so when we think about 2016 was a reaction of 8 years of change that was like crept up on white America. And so what's important to remind the gatekeepers is that no, we need to keep opening a door, because by 2045, this country is going to be more, and I'm going to use the word minority, which I hate, but it's going to be more people of color than all white. And we're going to come with diverse perspectives. And we're going to want content. And we actually have money. And we're going to be the one that's going to drive, you know, what gets played. And I think it's important that, for what it's worth, what you're seeing on television today or within media today is a reflection of an audience that is demanding more. And so, because people of color are demanding more, you're going to see more of that on the screen. And it's important that that continues to happen, because if that stops, well, that's a business problem.
Right.
Yes, and we need to talk about that.
Yeah.
We need you're bursting, Andrea. Say something.
No, I mean, I agree with everything that Chris is saying. I mean, if you don't, you know, if you're not creating the content, if you cannot think that this is just like some sort of fleeting moment, right? We cannot. So, I mean, it's everything from of us who are within these newsrooms to continue, all of us, and not just the people of color, to like make sure that we're still, you know, making sure stories are getting into the rundown and getting into the newscast, right? It's making sure all of us have this responsibility. And I say this a lot, that just because I have D&I in my title doesn't mean I'm the only one responsible for this. Everyone should think that D&I is in their title. And if not only just in content, but I mean, even if you're seeing things that are going on that are wrong, you know, people being treated really, like, you need to, you know, stand up, and especially I think for our allies to stand up. So, you know, if you're seeing something happening in a meeting to someone of color that's unfair, you know, don't let it be on that person to say something, right? You know, everyone else should. But I think, to your point too, it is just a business imperative that we are thinking about in a diverse way that represents like what our country looks like. You're not going to be able to survive as a media company if you're not thinking in this way, in terms of creating the content, you know, that the audience wants to see.
Mark, can you have any proof that there's money there? You're muted. Mark, you're muted.
I apologize. Okay, can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, great. Yeah, no, absolutely. In terms of the business perspective, in fact, McKinsey did a research, diversity in the workplace, and the company's financial performances. So what they did was they took more than 1,000 companies, and what they discovered was that the executive teams ranking in the top 25% of racial and ethnic diversity, were 33% more likely to reap the financial returns above the national median for their industries.
Say that again. Say that again. Say it again.
Yeah. So the executive teams, so meaning C-suite, all those folks in the top 25% of racial and ethnic diversity were 33% more likely to reap the financial returns above the national median for their industry. So in other words, there are 33% more likely to be more financially successful. So, the stories that we have to tell is exactly that. Not only is it the right thing to do, but there's practical things that give to the society. It's not only morally important, but it has financial benefits. And I think the fact that we are in the entertainment business, we need to make it entertaining for people to understand it. It's just like, when Jesus spoke in parables, he made these statements at the time where people heard these stories that they'd never heard, and they had practicalities of life lessons that went along with it. Or any other good storytellers. And I think we need to tell good stories behind these important things of what diversity really means, and how we could improve the society around us. I think also the thing that I think is really important is it really starts with us. We have no control over changing others. They're going to have their perspective. We could certainly influence them, help them understand. But one thing we can change is within ourselves, right? So one of the things that I've been really into, in fact, my oldest daughter is 12, educated me on this, on implicit bias.
Yeah. The 12-year-olds know all about that.
Yeah, it was incredible. She wrote a paper. She even did a speech about it. She was very passionate about it. And, when I started to do some research after she was telling me about it, they conducted this experiment where they blindfolded these judges for an orchestra auditions, right? And they all, majority of them, they choose male instrumentalists for some reason. That's just what's been happening. When they blindfolded, they had the same results, because what they found out was they heard heels click as they came on stage. So unconsciously, they knew it was a woman, and therefore they were discriminating against them. So that's how sensitive bias can be. In fact, Harvard University has a test, an official test. You could go on their website and look to see what categories that you are unconsciously biased. It goes from, are you unconsciously biased towards ethnicity, or a person who are heavier versus thinner. They have different categories that you can do, and see. And I think it's important. I think what we got to do is we have to embrace those people who are wanting to change for something that they feel they want to change about themselves. Through this research, another person really came up in a talk show who basically claimed that he grew up as a racist and he wants to change that. And how powerful is that for someone to admit that, to be and admitting something that is probably one of the most hated disclaimer, yet he is really wanting to change. Real change comes through transparency and admitting, and in religious format they call it repent, right? But there's power in that when you actually admit something that you want to change yourself about. And this is one of those things that I think could be a very powerful thing. I think we need to embrace more of that. It's okay if you are a certain way, but if you want to change about it, we need support them to do that. So I really think it comes from it starts with us. It starts with, is there something that I need to portray, need to make a change with myself that I don't realize that I'm portraying to others. And then I think we should be an evangelist for change of that sort of inner change.
Well, you're preaching to the choir over here, because we are with you. But Angela, when you're creating content for Tamron, you know, you're a supervising producer. Do you think about color? Do you think about BIPOC? Do you think, let me bring, you know, I need to structure this story so that I've got, you know, a white guest on this week, or, you know, I mean, do you think about race at all when you're creating content?
Not for this show, because I know that Tamron's going to keep the conversation going. She's going to tell the stories that, you know, here, look, here's the beauty of having your own show. You get to do what you want, right? You get to tell the stories that maybe you weren't allowed to do when you worked at another network or when you were part of another news show, right? But now that, you know, you have your name on a show, you can literally do whatever it is you want. And she's really great about that. And so for us, we're very well-rounded. I mean, she wants to tell the stories of African Americans, the indigenous Asian Americans. For her, it's all inclusive. And I think that's just, you know, by her nature. But I think, like everyone's sort of in agreement, the way to sustain it is really just to keep the conversation going. The minute we let up, that's when everything else that we've been fighting for and we've been discussing lets up too, right? So the same oomph and activity that we put in when, you know, there is a shooting, you know, by a police officer, or when someone of color has been killed, you know, innocently, or like a Breonna Taylor situation, we need to keep that same momentum going, because the minute it dies down, that's when the conversations die. And that's when, you know, we're basically starting anew, right? And that's why we're always back to square one. And a lot of times we're not really moving the needle, because we have these serious conversations when things happen. We'll put, you know, Breonna Taylor's picture on a magazine. That's great. But why does it take her being dead to put someone of color on a magazine, you know? So it's I think it's a give and take, but I think the way to do that is to just have people of color telling those stories so that we can be portrayed in the light that we want to be portrayed in, and those same people will keep those conversations going.
You're talking about energy and you're talking about passion. We all are. I find that there is also some impatience and, do I dare use the R word, rage around moving corporations into a more, you know, BIPOC-centric places. When I look at, you know, the films featured in the film festival, when I look at, you know, directors, when we look behind the scenes, recently, you know, Mulan, you know, came under a lot of fire, not just because of the geographical issues around it, but because, you know, it was helmed by white people, you know, from Disney, you know. So younger people in particular are really angry, and they're out of patience for, you know, frankly, sometimes people like us who have titles and who have the positions, and they, you know, get a little frustrated that we're not burning down the house, you know, with our rage. How do you guys address that, you know, to the public at large, you know, but also to your, you know, maybe younger colleagues? I think we're all over 35 here. I could be wrong, but don't ask me, and I will not.
All right. I'm fine with that. I'm over that. So
I think it's important to, particularly in this moment, is you got to make them part of the process.
right. Yeah.
Right. And so, you know, even like I'm inspired by this younger generation, because they don't give a fuck. They don't care. They're saying things that
You should say what you were originally going to say, because
you know, they don't give a fuck, right? I mean, they grew up underneath Obama. Change was supposed to happen,
yes.
right? And so I think that rage that they have is well placed, because they grew up in a generation where, oh, I thought we were done with this.
Right.
Why are you all being so silent? And so when I look at, like, you know, some of the corporate activism that's happening in some of our brands, a lot of the activism within these companies are coming from people under 30. And I get it, because Obama told them to, right? And so it's important to understand where that's coming from. They are the leaders of tomorrow, and I think it's important to make them part of the process, because they've learned a new way. And so for those of us who are older, we came up underneath another generation and be like, okay, well, we're going to sit back and we're going to silently protest and know this is wrong. But I can tell you, it's making even us who are over 45 sort of rethink our voice, you know, understand that we don't have to be docile. We can question stuff. We have power. And the way I know I'm doing is I say, okay, well, if you're under 25 and you really have some energy, come help me make this argument, you know, come do this position. Because that's the only way change is going to happen, is by letting, you know, put something out there that can be risked, you know, by saying it. And I think that's why I think sustainable part of this, and I don't want to call it a movement. This is the way it should be anyway. This is just the continued evolution of what should be happening anyway. And the only way to do that is keep letting young people speak, empower them, teach them, show them some history, but also acknowledge their voice.
Eugenia,
Mark, you're being very I'm sorry, Andrea.
No, I was just going to add, you and I were just talking about this, you know, being inspired by this younger generation. I think, you know, especially I think for me, my parents were first generation Canadian, and it's sort of like, you know, from the Caribbean. So it's kind of like when you get into a work environment, just put your head down, do your work, kind of don't shine too much. And I talk about this a lot because I think most of my career, I didn't even want to talk about the things that I did well. I didn't want to, like, you know, even say something sometimes if something was, you know, said to me in a way like, or something racist happened to me or some other injustice happened to me, I kind of like just go call my other friends who were in the business and say, can you believe this? But now at this generation, this other generation is really inspiring us to speak up more. I think I've spoken up more in this 44th year, right? I've spoken up more now than, you know, when I was 24. You know, because I was also nervous. I didn't want to lose my job. I was on a work visa, you know, so I was like, let me just, you know, but now I have a green card. So I feel like I can, you know, speak more. But I think it's important for us, you know, no matter how old we are, right, that we are sharing our journeys and being authentic, because we don't want anyone to feel who's coming up behind us that they can't wear their hair natural, or they have to leave parts of themselves outside of the newsroom or outside of the, you know, the company, you know, at the company door when they come in. You know, we want everyone to really be as authentic as possible, because that's the only way we are going to make change in all of the different spaces that we are. And so I think for our allies, and especially people who are listening to this, I think it's, you know, making sure we're encouraging and creating workplaces and cultures where people feel like they can truly belong and really speak up about a lot of these things, especially if it's not working.
Mm-hmm. Mark, were you going to say something?
No, I was just gonna just chime in. I totally agree with Andrea and both Chris and Andrea. You know, there's just this approach that when we saw these rioting happening and protests, I mean, they're obviously a respectful way of approaching things versus violence. And when you go towards violence, it only, you know, confirms what these other people have been believing that people are. It's a negative way of doing things, right? And I grew up, you know, in New York City during the 80s and 90s. And I've seen a lot of that, you know, Rodney King trial, when that happened, right, was going on. I mean, that was just, I feel like I'm seeing a repeat of what's been happening. And of course, in those days in New York City, if you grew up in the 80s in New York City, the violence was beyond what you could imagine. I just believe that respect does take a lot of work, and it does take a lot of work because the payoff is huge if you approach it that way. You know, it takes a lot of courage to show respect, right? And I think individuals have to grow into that. And with this generation, because one of the channels that INSP actually launched was what's called Halogen, which eventually became Pivot TV. By Participant Media bought it, and it essentially went dark. But so we aimed at like just looking at what millennials are like, and millennials are the closest generation to what the 60s were. Their priority is really about, freedom and their rights more than the monetary compensation. So that's not the first driver, which is incredibly powerful. So I totally believe that, as Chris was talking about, getting them in the process. And I think we should be in their process too. I think it's almost like, cross-pollinating and symbiotically making changes together. Because I don't know about you folks. I mean, I got kids and I learn from them. I could honestly say I learn from them more than they learn from me, just in terms of how they approach things. They have a lot more passion and they're less fearful of things. As we live our lives, I think we kind of start to protect and be more of preserving things rather than stimulating things. And I think the stimulation needs to be happening across the generation.
Do you think, all of you, that we can harness this energy and actually move the needle in the entertainment industry? I mean, what everybody is saying is so right. And we all have our little pockets, right? But if we could write a blueprint for something that everybody watching this could take back to their offices and say, we need to blah, 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 and make our workplace a more dynamic, diverse culture. Like, what would you want to say to them to move this needle, to move this conversation forward? We talk about it, right? Like, let's keep talking. But what can you think of an action that we can have people take to make their work more diverse?
I think for one, you have to bring in people who are diverse, right? So that's the first part of it. So a lot of companies now have these diversity and inclusion folk, right? And their job is to bring in those people, right? You got Eugenia and we have 2 people on here that are part of that, right? So I think that's the first part, to bring people in, but not just bring people in. If we want to move the needle, it has to be people who can make decisions. Because, okay, I'll just use a production assistant, for example. We could bring in 50% of African-American production assistants, but they don't make the decisions, right? They're low on the totem pole. They'll eventually move up, but they are not making the decisions. So I think the biggest thing is we need diverse people of color that are making the decisions. Then the second thing is the stories that we're telling. If we don't have a diverse group of people telling these stories and writing for us, we're always going to be portrayed in a different light, because we can only write for each other, right? Like, I can't write for an Asian community because I'm not embedded in that community. I know nothing about the Asian community. I can't write for, I can write for the Hispanic community because I'm part Hispanic, but you get what I'm saying. We need people who represent us so that they can write for us. We need those faces in front of the camera, those that are telling the stories, so that when our little brown children are looking at these folks telling the stories, they know that this is also a possibility from them, for them. So I think there's a lot that needs to be done, but I would say really we need to hire people who can actually make the decisions, not just hire someone low on the totem pole and say, okay, we've diversified this organization. That's not good enough, because yes, they've diversified the organization, but unfortunately, those people that they've brought in, they're not really part of the decision-making process. They're not the ones that are sitting at the table. They're not the ones agreeing what content we're showing. And so I think that is the core, people who can actually make those decisions. And unfortunately, there's not many of us in those seats.
So do we need to re-implement quotas? Remember quotas? Remember reading about quotas in the 70s? How, when a lot of companies, especially Fortune 500s, they had to have, 10 Black people on, within this salary band or within this title. And we moved away from that because there were moves away from affirmative action, or the major benefactors of affirmative action became white women. Right? So if a white woman got it, then the quote unquote diversity, whatever the phrase was in the 70s or early 80s, it was, the box got checked. So, do you think that's a good thing, to go back to putting a number?
I mean, I could tell you that some of that actually happens through other means of business or contingency. For example, when NBC, when Comcast acquired NBC, there was a consent decree by the FCC and FTC saying that, look, you need to launch 10 Hispanic or African American channels if you want this merger. It happened after the merger, but that was the contingency, and they had to, abide by that rule. And if it wasn't done, then some of these Revolt TV or some of the other channels would have not been on the dial. And let's be honest. Let's say if lawsuits against racism or discrimination was in existence, how many corporations would really champion diversity? And you got to ask these questions. I think how much of it is authentic? Is it because there's these rules and they don't want to be sucked up by, and lose money versus, there's these things that I do believe, and I'm skeptical about, honestly, because they want to make a big deal out of it. We're doing this, we're giving away this much money for this cause. And it's always the Caucasian guy who's getting the diversity award for some reason in these events, and it's like, wow, and I'm not knocking. I think there are truly champions of diversity within the Caucasian community, but I think these rules do help. I think until the society naturally gets there on their own, I think implementing these and seeing the benefits of it because of these laws or because of the regulations, and even SAG, now I think they're working on a clause where they have to have certain number of minorities or people of color in order to in a script or in a production in order to be viable for a membership or what have you. So I think there are benefits of that. It's just the way how you lay it out or how you kind of blend it into different situations.
I actually don't think people change until it hurts, or as I think it's attributed to Winston Churchill, who said, you can't get a man to change his heart, but if you get him by his balls, his heart will follow.
Or by his paycheck, his or her paycheck. When you tie it to metrics, we are all businesses. Although we're in the business of entertaining, ultimately it's around, hitting certain numbers. And so I think, more than anything, I think we all have to be transparent about also our numbers, right? At least internally. So if you don't even know the makeup of your organization, how can you affect change? Thankfully last year as a company, we released those numbers, and it was great for me as an employee to see that. And news and sports, we have released it this year by division, so people see where we are and where we have to improve. So I don't know if it's necessarily around affirmative action, it's around goals. We have goals around mid to senior level, to Angela's point, especially around, there are a ton of, I think all of us have been in these programs, right? Entry level internship programs and things like that. But for us, we're also looking at the people of color who are in your organization already. That's the quickest way to get an EP, when there's like some producers and some senior producers that just maybe have not gotten that chance to be an EP. So I think more than even just looking outside, I think a lot of organizations need to look at the people of color within, especially, honestly, your Black employees and your Asian employees and your Latina and Latino employees, because now more than ever, every other news network is looking for, a Black EP. Right. And I think most of us know, I can call a number of them. Right. But so everyone else is looking at them, too. So as an organization, you have to make sure that you are retaining the talent that you have, that you're developing them and giving them the chances. Because sometimes, in this industry, a lot of friends and I talk about sometimes other people getting chances. And us having to sort of work and work and work and sometimes be in the same role for 10 years maybe before you get that next shot. So I think it's really on in these companies to really look at the talent that you have within, or else you've invested maybe 7-10 years in this person, and then they're going to leave and go to Tamron Hall and be an EP, you know, or they're going to leave, you know, because they were given that shot, you know. So I think, you know, you definitely have to look inside, but I think also just starting, if you haven't as an organization, just being transparent. And I think that will say a lot to your employees about where you stand, right? And then that's a way for them to also hold you accountable. So when you do that, you know, you have to make sure that you're continuing to release these numbers. And so we're looking at where we are. I think you're muted.
That's a big important point, right? Like, you know, having people who identify you, having people who groom and mentor you. So to bring in that topic, who mentored you? Who taught you that you could do? Who showed you that, you know, listen, I see something? Because everybody gets it. We get it. We tend to get it less than other people. But do you remember the person who identified you?
I can start. Sorry, I don't want to dominate, but honestly, I think it was, you know, was my first boss. His name's Bill Galvin, white male. You know, I met him when I interned at CNN Sports Illustrated, and I went back to Canada. I actually didn't think I would ever have an opportunity to come back to the States because, you know, with immigration, that's a huge investment. And a lot of times, and what they said to me when I left my internship is like, we only sponsor executive producers or on-air talent. And I knew that wasn't going to be me. Long story short, another woman who was my internship coordinator, Stephanie Snipes, I kept in touch with her, and she reached out to me a year after I graduated, told me about an opportunity. It actually didn't work out, but she said, hey, I mentioned your name and Bill remembered you from your internship and you working hard, transcribing all those hours. And so I had a conversation with him and he offered me a job, you know, and he made it happen with my immigration, was just such an amazing leader to me, taught me so much about being a great leader. He gave me my first full-time job at CNN. And then years later, you know, when I told him I wanted to transition from more of the editorial side to the business side, you know, he would sit with me, show me what he was doing. So show me the financials, he showed me what it took to be an executive. He was like, so do you want to look at budgets? You got to learn budgets if you want to do this. Do you want to do this? So long story short, he actually gave me my first management opportunity 7 or 8 years after that. Just because, you know, years before I told him I wanted to make that change, and he trusted me enough to say, you know, I know you can do it. And I think that's a great example of not just mentorship, but sponsorship. You know, he opened doors for me, and more than that, in any room that we would go into, he would introduce me and say, this is Andrea. She's amazing. And this is why. She started up our website, or she did X, Y, Z. I mean, sponsorship, I think, is really around people speaking for you, not only when you're right there, but when you're not in the room, and saying, okay, I think Chris, you know, should be getting this EP job, you know, when he's in the room, when people are talking about that. So I think, again, I think mentorship is important, but I think sponsorship is even more important. And that person doesn't necessarily have to look like you. And I thought that was, for me, that was the first time in my career I felt like someone who didn't look like me looked at me and said, you remind me of me. You know, I like your hustle. It reminds me of me when I was in college or when I was first starting out. So he's still, you know, definitely huge in my career and my life too.
What about you, Chris?
I can definitely say, as I'm sitting here listening, there were 7 women, 6 of them of color, who've mentored me or sponsored me. And it goes back to BET. My first producer who gave me my first job at BET, Jackie Clark. My vice president at BET, Deborah Tang, you know, who said, yeah, you can still work at BET and go to graduate school. Go do it this way. When I got out of BET and I was out and living in LA, Stephanie Frederick, who is now owns a company in LA, who really saw me as somebody who really was high performing and introduced me to people. And she introduced me to the person who got me into WGBH. At WGBH, Marita Rivera, who's former general manager at WGBH, who tapped me for World. My current general manager, who said, "You're going to be an EP." And all the people around her who said, "Yeah, he'd be a good EP." So I could tell you, on two hands, 7 women, 6 of them of color, either sponsored or mentored me. And so I think that was, as I think about it, like actually critically think about it, it was other people of color, other folks who are marginalized who said, "Oh, he should be in that room." And I think it's important to sort of remember that when we're in these positions, when you get to this level, that we got to reach back and pull up those people and open the doors for them and sponsor people in different ways.
Mm-hmm. Mm. Paul? Wait. Mark? Somebody in the Bible. I knew it's somebody in the Bible.
Yeah, I would say for me, the person that really stood out and who I still have a very close relationship with is my former boss at Core TV. And he was a Jewish gentleman by the name of Bob Rose, and he ran distribution, what I'm doing now. And I mean, he really literally kind of taught me what the business was about. And whenever he saw me working late, he said, "Someday you're going to run this department," and eventually became true. But I remember hearing that, and that really motivated me to stay late and work harder because of that. Because I didn't really think I was good enough to run a department of that, scale or what he did, because it seemed like there's a lot going on. And then there was like a mentorship program that happened within the Core TV, and they paired me up with a person by the name of Evan Shapiro, who was a president of Sundance TV and IFC TV. And before that, he was a VP at Core TV. And at the time I think I was an analyst or manager at the time. And I remember we read a book together called Good to Great. And we were talking about our BHAGs, and he made a commitment to me saying, "You know what? I'm going to be a general manager for a major network within the next 2 years." And I said, "Wow, that's really ambitious because you're only a VP right now." And then I said, "What is your goal?" And I said, "I'm going to be a head of distribution within, I don't know, 4 years." And I thought that was really ambitious for me too. But he did it within a year. He became a general manager for Sundance, or no, at the time it was IFC. And 3.5 years it took me to become the head of distribution. So there's something about, it's like working out with a partner or anything with accountability and transparency. When you have that accountability, the power behind that is incredibly, incredibly strong. And I think, mentors and sponsors, they're the ones who actually does open that door of not only the positions that's available, but the imagination and the possibility that can be achieved. Because I really didn't think myself to be that person or seeing that to be the bond. So that was a really cool experience for myself.
Wow, these stories are so powerful. Angela, I happen to know, I've seen a little bit of your trajectory, but you've had mentors who shaped you and who groomed you.
I would actually say, now that I'm listening to the conversation, more so sponsors, and you actually are one of them. So I would have to say Eugenia Harvey, Candy Carter, so 2 African-American females, and then Mitch Semmel, a Jewish guy. Mitch Semmel, I had the pleasure of meeting at CNN, and I was sort of stuck at CNN. I was on a show for 5 or 6 years, and they just weren't promoting me. And I just chalked it up. They had their reasons, but I knew that I needed to be promoted. And when I heard that a new EP was coming to CNN and he was going to be working on a show, I literally just found his email and emailed him and said, "Hey, I would love to work for the show." And he said, "Come down to my office. Are you in the building?" So I literally went down to his office and he hired me on the spot. Sadly, that show he wasn't the EP because there was just some issues between him and the host. But he said, there's going to be another show coming, I promise you. And sure enough, another show came to CNN, and he got me my promotion to associate producer. And since then, I've worked with Mitch Semmel on 5 jobs, one being the Gayle King show, one being a show on Sirius that was part of the Hallmark Channel, one where we built HuffPost Live. So I had the pleasure of working with him to build HuffPost Live. And then we did a joint project in Florida with another production company. So just working with him opened so many doors. And then Eugenia, I had the pleasure of meeting Eugenia at Arise. And I was supposed to just work there for the summer. And I guess she saw something in me and she said, you know what, I want to keep you on board. So I never went back to my full-time job. I stayed at Arise for many, many years. And then I had the pleasure of working with her on some BET projects. And then I would have to say Candy Carter, who I've worked with on a few BET projects as well. And then a few other shows, including Ice and Coco, The View, and then now Tamron Hall. But I think, you know, when I was younger, I really wanted a mentor. It was something that I really, really wanted. And I've learned, looking back now, those sorts of things just have to kind of happen organically. You know, when you approach someone and say, will you be my mentor? You know, it's kind of weird. It's kind of strange. And it's just like, okay, but I don't really know what I'm going to do. I don't really know. I don't even know who you are, you know? So I kind of like the sponsorship aspect because indirectly you're learning from that person. If you're doing the right thing, you should be looking at what your sponsor's doing and why they have a certain faith in you and why they believe in you. So you're kind of mimicking what they're doing. So in essence, you're kind of getting that mentorship. But I think the sponsorship is more important. It's like when the doors are closed and you're not in the room, if you don't have someone to speak up for you, you're just going to get, you know, you're forgotten, right? You're just going to get swept under the rug. So I believe wholeheartedly that sponsorships are the key, and inadvertently they just become your mentors and you grow and learn from them. So that's my experience, and it was easy. Mitch Semmel, Eugenia Harvey, and Candy Carter.
And now I feel bad for all the people I didn't mention, but I was like,
Okay.
Shout out right now.
Shout out my current boss, Johnny, who gave me a chance to be in D&I when I had no experience in D&I. But again, she's someone that has been an incredible mentor to me too for the past 10 plus years, just listening to me and then gave me a shot to do this.
That's fantastic. I will say we have about, just to keep us honest, we have about 15 more minutes.
Wow.
In my current capacity, time flies when you're having fun, right? But in my current capacity as Chief DEI Officer at WNET, I started the blueprint, and we are just in the blueprint phase of a program called From Progression to Succession, because one of the things that's a gaping hole, you know, in our play here is the ability to sponsor and to have people grow, because in most places you're so busy just doing your job, right? And you're right, Angela, like if you know, I love talented people. I mean, that's always been my thing. I saw it in you immediately, that was, you were a star, you know, and I mean that, you know, you know, but I it is not a thing. Like it's not a known, you know, thing that gets played out in places of employ, especially in content creation universes, right? Like, you know, you're just like, look, I'm hired to be the AD on this project. I'm hired to be the AP on this, and you know, you leave where you start. But what I'm going to try to do here is create a program where people are identified, you know, trained in areas where they are vulnerable, you know, polished in areas where they already are shiny, and really train them for areas of succession. You know, eventually people do retire. A little joke in PBS is they don't, you know, they don't retire. You know, we are happily, you know, very age diverse as well in our company. It's not just a company for young people, and it's wonderful. I mean, I love talking to people who, you know, work there for 30 and
years,
sometimes 40 years. Yeah, that's the norm. But eventually they might want to retire. And I think it's so important to find somebody, to be able to identify somebody who who has not just the skill level, but the desire and that passion, and to be able to do what you guys have had done to you. I will shout out, my mentors, Charlene Hunter Galt as a journalist and a friend. She's my sorority sister. She is a friend. She has, kicked me in the, what, when she thought I wasn't doing it right or bigger or big enough. And we've had a chance to do some travels around the world together as producer director, and it's been and talent, and it's been just amazing. And even now, my current boss, Neil Shapiro, whether he knows it or not, mentors me in the sense of, making me think about so many parts of running a company every single day. But I do want to give the original person, Marlene Altman. I actually hunted her down because I was an intern at CBS, and Marlene saw that, I was literally collating papers back in the day, pre wasn't that long ago, but before they had the super duper copiers. One of the things that I had to do, I was an editorial assistant, and she saw my resume, and she's like, "You went to Columbia. Why are you back here, like, basically, filing?" And I was like, "I don't know." I just thought this was the Black girl spot. I don't know, and she was like, "No." And she actually created a job for me. She created a job for me. And I, years later, when I moved back to New York, I hunted her down, and we now see each other as often as possible. She's in her 80s now and still Spitfire, so, and still teaching me, at least. And so that's exciting to do that. Now, part two of this question is, do you mentor? And who do you mentor? And how are you doing it? How are you grooming somebody to become the next EP or DEI senior director, or the next supervising producer, or the next programming guru? How are you doing it?
I can start. I think I'm doing it informally, formally. I think I've done it almost as long as, honestly, as long as I've been here, in a sense, because when I started, it was, for a lot of younger people who were like maybe at my college in Canada, like, how did you get to CNN? So it's like, phone calls and conversations. And so I'm a part of formal mentorship programs. So one is She Runs It, which is a nation. I have an amazing mentee there, Justine. But I think it's a lot of informal mentorship. So a lot of people reach out to me on LinkedIn or at conferences or other places, and I make it, just part of my day to try to, answer those messages and do a Zoom call or do a coffee when we used to be able to do that. Because for a lot of the students that are reaching out to me, sometimes, they don't have family that's in media. They don't have neighbors who can give them that internship or tell them about, like, what this industry really is about, and make time to talk to these kids. Because a lot of these kids are, Black students, or other people of color, who just are like, "Hey, I can kind of relate to you. You look like you'd be nice to me." And, and they're so gracious when I reply to their email or to their message. So, I mean, that's also, I call it, someone coined the term that I heard last year, this invisible work. So sometimes, as people of color in this industry, we do a lot of this sort of extra work, having conversation. We know it's important. It's important that we are opening those doors or making other introductions. So I'm all about, whether that relationship spans years or even it's just a few months, if I can connect them to other people that can show them the way, or give them that job, or, connect them to someone else that gives them a job, I feel like that's important. So again, it's a little bit of informally and formally. And I think for this audience who's listening to all of us, it doesn't take a lot to do that, right? Because I feel like sometimes it's on people of color to do that. And I think everyone should, take the opportunity to, take some people under their wing or answer those emails. You never know whose life you could change. and you shouldn't just be doing it for like the accolades on a panel, but you know, but because we really need to really make change. And a lot of times I think people are asking like, what can I do? Well, it's, I think being a sponsor, it's being a mentor. That's how you can show some true allyship, honestly.
And you may find the next great star. I mean, you know, you may find the next Ryan Coogler, and you can be all.
Yeah, and if you know, if it takes a little bit of that ego thing to make you do something good, you know, I'm fine with it, right? You know, if it takes a little bit of that because you think you're gonna find that person, fine. If that's how it starts, but you'll be surprised. Again, I think that I learned so much, you know, from the people I mentor. You know, I think it's definitely, you know, a two-way relationship. And so I think it's definitely just a part of what we do, what we should be doing anyway.
Chris, do you mentor?
Yeah, and I do it in a lot of different ways. Within my team, I try to really make sure that the team that's around me, like there's at least 2 people who've been with me at least 5 years for whatever reason. I don't know why they stay. But one of them has always started out as an intern, has had different positions within the team. That was intentional because of how I started out as an intern. That I think it's important that when you're finding people who are interns, really help them lay out a path for themselves, so that they can find whether it's a position internally or a position that they want to shoot for externally. So over the years, we've had a lot of interns that have either stayed with Whirl for a period of time, maybe it was their first job, or they've gone off at some other place in GDH, or they've gone off and, you know, become award-winning directors in China, which actually happened. But I also mentor a lot of independent filmmakers. Through the work that I do, a lot of times that first film that somebody's working on right out of college, I'm giving them their first broadcast. And my hope is that credit is going to allow them to get the funding to do that next film. And mentoring them through the distribution process is the process of business, showing them how it works, to really look out for themselves and think about, well, if they're going to be in this business, how do you protect yourself? What do you do with this film once it broadcasts? What are the different other avenues you can go for? So really spending time with them, being flexible with them, let them talk your ear off until 10 o'clock at night on a call, just to sort of talk them into taking this fee, but also taking their questions, you know? And so it's not uncommon for me to spend a lot more time outside of the 5 o'clock just talking to filmmakers about the business and where their projects can go. And a lot of times I never get the films, they go off and they go take it to IL or POV, or they go off and sell it to HBO for hundreds of thousands of dollars. But at least I know I had a fingerprint on it because I spent time with them.
And full disclosure, I saw you at work with Black Public Media Consortium, and I think your mentee won, right, last year?
Yeah, he won and ended up getting an ITVS grant.
So yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
I can attest to, you know, your money where you're going.
Yeah, I'm not going to get that project though. That's such a good project.
Such a good. Well, we could talk about that. Angela and Mark, do you guys do you have an opportunity to mentor people yet?
Say for me, informally, people just, I don't know, people would like, especially interns will come to me and ask me questions, and then we somehow form some sort of relationship, and then I kind of feel like it's my job to kind of pave the way for them. And then if I see someone that really has a lot of potential but just doesn't really have, you know, or know how to navigate, I definitely look out for them. I've gotten a lot of entry-level people positions because I did see something, you know, in them, and have recommended them for positions. So I would say informally. Again, I think when we think of mentoring, because I know, you know, 15 years ago when I thought of mentoring, it was like sitting with someone and sort of just being this formal process, like as if it was really some sort of program. And I think we can get tripped up with that verbiage. I think you can mentor in a lot of ways, like Andrea said, and Chris. I think depending on who the person is and what their needs are, it's going to change by situation. So I think it's really just being available, listening, and being able to help people when you can, when you're in a position where you can help people. And again, those are the ways you see your mentorship, working, within those people when they're moving up the ranks and you know that you've played a part in them.
Yeah, that's exciting. Mark?
Yeah, two people come into mind. One by the name of, there you are. There you go. Adam, who I've met probably about a year ago, and he was in marketing, and he has a daughter who actually is in the same class as my daughter, my youngest one, my 5-year-old. But he's been going through this relationship. He's going through some really heavy court cases for his daughter having custody, and somehow, because I went through the same thing in terms of with my ex, so we bonded there. And what's really cool about mentorship is that, as you said, when you try to make it official, it's kind of like saying, "Hey, you want to be my girlfriend?" It becomes really awkward, right? But when it's right, when it's authentic, and they call you, "Hey, you're my mentor," not like asking you to be a mentor, but when your relationship gets to that point, and he goes, "Man, you're like one of the coolest mentor I ever had," that really struck me as like, wow, it really warms my heart. And the definition of loving somebody, which I really didn't think too much about until I started reading this book, the Book of Mysteries. What he says is that it's the ability to put yourself in the other person's shoes is to love somebody. Without being able to empathize, it's impossible to love someone. So when you're mentoring or menteeing somebody, I think that's a really important to take a look at. You've been there as an intern, and you know how hard it was. And I'm sure it takes that empathy and saying, "Hey, I remember when I was your age, when I was trying to make it, the hardship, and therefore I'm going to help you." I think that's, the start of a beautiful mentor-mentee relationship.
Beautiful. I think empathy is the basis of where we all need to start in, in the work world to make us move forward, right? For us to all really make that change, you have to empathize. Even if you are not a person of color, you need to try to think about what it would be like, to be maybe a Black person. But it takes sort of learning and being around different people to understand and to your point, to empathize and love.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Wow, that is such a powerful way to end this about love, but I want to take all that energy and give each of you an opportunity to hit a closing thought. You're speaking to some of the most powerful people in entertainment. You're talking to some of the most interesting or influential people sometimes in the world. If they are entertainers themselves. So we're gonna pass the mic, and tell me your great thought that you would want them to know about making this world a more diverse, inclusive, and equitable place. What you'd like for them to do. So I'm gonna start with you, Andrea, because I just feel like you're there.
I don't know. It's so much pressure. I mean, I think what Mark just said so beautifully, right, around empathy. And one of my other friends was talking about radical empathy. So it's that idea that, just because you may not have lived that experience, you can understand and also just believe that experience happened to that person. So I think, when you are in these positions of power, know that you do have some privilege. So I think it's acknowledging that, but then taking small steps to make a difference, knowing that you can be a sponsor and that you can really affect change. And so really taking upon yourself to know that, you know, the work that you're doing can really transcend if you look at it in an even bigger scope. I mean, it's all of our duties to just really make this world better for our children or our nieces and nephews and this next generation. I mean, that's sort of what drives me every day. I have 2 kids, and my daughter explained what D&I was. What's this new job? You know, like, what's diversity and inclusion? And I remember saying to her when she was in a real classroom, I said, you know, it's part of my job to make the newsrooms and different spaces reflective and look like your classroom, which is really diverse, you know? And then she was like, oh, okay. But honestly, my hope is that there aren't jobs, you know, you don't need a D&I or DEI officer, CDO, you know, in any of our fields. I mean, the goal is that all of us really, really, you know, take it to heart that we need to make a change. And so just pretend that you have D&I in your title this day moving forward. And if you need help, give me a call.
Awesome. Angela?
I would say diversify. We need to diversify, even if you're not affected by a specific issue. To me, I don't know why anyone would want to work, you know, in a corporation or in a place where it's majority of one, right? Because you're not getting different ideas. Everyone thinks the same. Everyone has the same idea. So I would like to believe that if you have a more diverse range of people, whether it's age, you know, race, you're going to get different views, right? Because we all see the world from a different view. I mean, I'm from Brooklyn, New York, so I see the world differently than you, Eugene. You're growing up in the South, right? We have different perspectives. So even though we're both African, we bring a different perspective to that table, you know? So I think the key is just diversifying, and I can't stress it enough, diversifying where you have people of color in the positions, I don't want to say that matter, but that are the decision makers, the ones that can open up the doors for others, the ones that can hire the directors and the writers of color, ones that are truly making the decisions, because at the end of the day, those are the ones that are making impact.
Awesome. Chris?
I'm going to say this carefully. If you are a gatekeeper, just say yes. And I'm saying it carefully because you can't say yes to everything, of course. But there's going to come a time where you're going to be sitting across from someone who either wants a job, who doesn't look like you. And, you know, that might not be the easy yes for you. But on paper, you're going to have two people there, or 3 people, however it is. And generally, you're going to lean to the person that looks like you, comes from your background. Go for the hard yes if you really believe in change. And so I just would say, just say yes. And I think if more people say yes to the hard yes, to the one that doesn't look like you, doesn't come from your background, but you can, you know, give them an opportunity, do it. You know?
That's awesome. And Mark, bring us home.
You know, beyond just corporate promotion, because I think a lot of times we get caught up with, hey, diversity means more money, means, you know, people of color being promoted. I think what really the importance of diversity is so that we have unity as people, you know, because unity is what really creates harmony for us. And, you know, it really starts with empathy, but also seeing good in everyone, because failing to see any good on one's other side makes no dialogue. It makes dialogue virtually impossible, right? Because we're so, like, politically, we're so we're so separated, especially in the society today. And, you know, Evelyn Beatrice Hall, who often gets misinterpreted and they think it's Voltaire's quote, she said, I may not agree with what you have to say, but I will fight to the death to defend your right to say it. And I think hearing that, when I first heard that quote, it's really the ultimate empathy to me. It's like, hey, you know what? It's not about me being right or you're being right, but I love you because I want you to say what you want to say because you have the right to do so. And that kind of spills over to all the other, sort of discussion that we had, because we could have our differences, but at the same time, just hearing differences, embracing the differences, and learning together and creating unity is what I think diversity is really about. Hopefully, people who are watching this and who've stayed tuned with our panel, career is important, yes, and you want to have a good life and you want to have a good family, but more importantly, I think it's the next generation and how to take it to the next level of creating unity within the society and this world. So yeah, that's sort of my last take on it.
Well, it's all about the love, and I have loved this panel. I have loved talking to you all, and thank you so very, very much. Angela, Willoughby, Andrea, Harry, Bibbs, Mark Kang, Chris Hastings. I'm Eugenia Harvey for the 44th Annual Atlanta Film Festival Creative Committee, and thank you all for watching, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you.